Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with Toby Witte, the author of this book, Sizing Bliss. Toby Witte has been immersed in the field of architecture on 2 continents for over a quarter century. Through his renowned award-winning residential design firm Witte, based in Charlotte, North Carolina, he guides his clients on in-depth design journeys, creating cutting-edge, modern, sustainable homes in the American Southeast. I've gotten about halfway through this book, and it's very interesting. I'm excited to get to some questions that I got for Toby. It's really fun to talk to authors because they have taken a lot of time to think about some stuff and write it down. So they're good people to talk to. So I'm excited about this. Give it up for Toby Witte. So, Toby Witte, welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Glad to have you on today and to work on my German pronunciation of names just a little bit more. So,
well, thank you, Trent. You did it perfectly well.
So I've been actually reading a book at night instead of scrolling through reels on my phone, which has been really good. So thank you for that. I need to start doing more of that because I'm really, really sick of all these little snippets about things, but no real thought arc over time. And I think that's something that's stealing from our collective conversation, is just all these little hits of information, but no real thought process long term. So it's good, really good for me to start to get back into this practice rather than just flipping through stuff.
Man, I'm so glad to hear that. That's awesome.
So first of all, when you wrote this book, who was your target audience for, like, what drove you to write the book, and who was your target audience in your head as you were writing?
Yeah, so the book is called Sizing Bliss, and I'm trying to address really my prospective clients, my clients, those people that are interested in sort of what I'm doing, and I really wanted to start our conversation on the right foot. And I literally had these moments where I was in, prospective client meetings, and there is so much to kind of go through and provide them the chance to get rid of in order to start the conversation where we need to start it. And, you don't really have that opportunity. You meet people and they want to dive in, and there's so much to go through that I felt like, something is missing here in this conversation. And so just like what you're describing about reading the book sort of on your own time, I wanted to provide my prospective clients with sort of my idea about what it is to create modern energy efficient homes. And so I wanted to kind of provide them with a leg up before we start the conversation. And it's working. It's crazy. I sent this book out, or they ordered on their own. And when we have the conversation, they almost quote back content from my own book. And so, if you enjoy the book and you want to talk to me, perfect. If you read the book and you like that boy's crazy, then it's good. It's a free conversation happening.
It's a good education and weeding out process for potential clients, I imagine.
Yeah, and it's good for them and for me. That way we have a chance to kind of, talk about what's important when we are both ready.
Right. So to jump into a really difficult question that kind of frames where you're writing this book from in your thinking, and I'll try and answer any questions you'd have about this question. Where does truth lie for you? Is it outside of us, or is it only within our individual experience?
Whoa, that's right out of the gate, a big question, huh?
Sorry.
I don't know. I'll try to. There's certainly a personal response for me there, and then I'll see if I can kind of bring that to the book, I guess, or my work. But someone said to me once, or I read it somewhere, the truth is there for religions. And my personal take is really that we live within our own perceptions of our surroundings, of how we understand ourselves to be, our being within the world. And of course, that is sort of trained, let's say, by so many pieces. I don't know whether part of it is DNA, whether part of it is upbringing, whether part is the sort of environment and surroundings and experiences we find ourselves in. But certainly we kind of create, I feel like that we create a kind of matrix out of which we operate. And I feel like the older we get, it can get a little bit encrusted. We can
Mm.
get a little lazy, or like you described with the doom scrolling, I guess, or whatever that's called.
Yeah,
I mean,
doom scrolling.
there's an easy way to kind of, and lazy way to kind of just take bits and pieces and declare them as truth. And so I find myself constantly being riveted by new experiences and change of thought and new ideas that I find invigorating, and hopefully allow me to meet people on their terms and understand them where they're coming from, but then also question my own beliefs and understandings, and find the opportunity to change that. And so to make that, I'm going to turn that question on you in a second as well, but just to turn that into shift that somehow find to shift back to the book and my work when I meet my clients. And so, yeah, so I am completely focused. My expertise is in modern energy efficient homes, at what I do, creating them. And so when I meet my prospective clients, they live in a completely different world than me. And they
Mm.
come with their own set of dreams and aspirations and understandings, and maybe sense of truth, that I need to understand, plug in, and find an answer for, so that the home we create for them is a fitting stage for their lives. And
Mm.
and so the book is there in part. One half of the book is me to crush nonsensical ideas that our um, sort of society, I guess, has created around the home building, home creation industry. And 99% of it has no bearing on how we want to live and how we need to live. And so my job is partly to say, forget about all that. Let me show you what those pieces are, how they've come to be, and why we should ignore them. And then the second half is for me to say, now that we've gone this far, let me share with you options and ideas and possibilities that are available to you.
Mm.
So now, to, since you threw this at me right out of the gate, I throw it right back at you. I mean, as an architectural photographer, I assume wondering about what truth is maybe front and center in your profession.
That's a interesting one for photography, because there's so little in the physical craft of capturing, but there's so much intellectual in the act of capturing with photography. So we're not painting. There's not a lot of physical tactile. It's where do I move my composition with my camera to bring the pieces of the world together, even though they're immovable, and tell the most compelling story. That's what I'm doing when I'm working commercially. When I'm working artistically, I focus on kind of more decay of human structural, physical systems or architecture or towns, and how they're falling apart or how they're not well thought out for some reason. It's a balance to what I do commercially. Commercially, everything's highly conceived, preconceived, designed, presented. it's like you're getting dressed up to go out, where the other stuff that I've photographed, that I call them beautiful ugly images, is more so the people wandering out in their slippers and pajamas to get the paper, and you get a really good image of it in the morning. That's I understand people through the choices that are left over after the people are removed and they thought this scene was something no one will look at. If you can see that and make it captivating, you learn so much about human nature in those scenes. So to me, the sense of capturing truth, to me, lies outside of my experience. I have to admit that my experience is something that I use to interact with truth and to identify truth through the subjective experience. There is a truth that is not objective until it comes through subjective experience to then be objectified into something, which is a really convoluted way of saying that I do think the truth is outside of us, but that we do have to engage in subjective experience, intellectual wrestling with our emotions and perceptions and all of the inputs that we have to then bring what we perceive into being, into objectification, to offer as a tool or a path or a foothold for others to be able to grow from. Now that engages really, in my opinion, the first two quotes that you have in the book that took me probably, I'm horrible at reading. I know that sounds great. But I have a constant conversation going on in my head that I have to turn the volume off to be able to then turn up the visual input by like the sheet music that I'm being told I need to think. That's like written, a written book to me is like performing sheet music. And when I play music, I can't read music, but I can play. And it's all by feeling and subjective experience. If I'm playing sheet music, I don't feel it, so I don't understand it. When I read a book, it's very, very hard for me to feel it unless it's a story narrative. So it's quieting my head to really get down to do this. And you have these two quotes at the beginning. I'll read through the two quotes, and then I'd like to see how we can play these off each other to understand a little bit more of what's going on, big picture. Anyways, so this first quote was the hardest for me to really piece together, but it's a pretty cool quote. An array of hitherto ignored materials and forms could reveal their qualities, while the status quo would be prevented from coercively suggesting itself to be the natural and eternal order of things. To me, that feels similar to the battle between political parties in the U.S. Whoever is in power is going to say, we are the status quo. There should not be progressive change or anything else beyond what we find to be the spot to progress to. So the liberals could say, we don't want to progress beyond what we find should be progressed to. And the conservatives will say, we should not progress beyond what we find what we should have progressed to. Now, that being said, the more open dispositions are going to be pushing for constant change more. I'm of a more open disposition, a more feminine disposition that does appreciate the more progressive design, more progressive ideas, more progressive music, stuff that's novel, that hasn't been done before. But the risk that comes with those things is that it's an attempt. We don't know that it's right. We're wandering into that experience to see if we can make something better. So in this first quote, I have this, any quote or anything that I work on, I have to draw something out to try and understand it. It might be hard for you to see that.
Yes,
but
that is so cool.
I have a stick man, and on one side he's got like, the Greek temples on one side, the classical stuff. The first, form of architecture really present in our collective society that we still see being built. We're not really building pyramids anymore, but we still build these Greek temples when it comes to our government institutions and everything else. There's something about an established golden ratio and all that I find that is like, that's a backstop. If you have no talent, just mirror that and you'll be okay. And that's like a law. If you're so stupid to think you can go out and murder people, refer to the law, don't murder people. It's a backstop for people who
Yeah.
can't perceive
Yeah.
beyond that. I find classical architecture, traditional design to be a similar thing. If you can't design, if you're not good, you go to the traditional form. It'll be good enough, but it's not going to be progressive. And those things, you can do it badly and you can do it well, but those are, to me, for my emotional state, those are backstops. Those are almost laws that you don't cross. Now, you can move away from them, and that's where we see the next quote from Winston Churchill. And this is very interesting to me. We shape our buildings, and afterwards, our buildings shape us. Now, from what I get from that is that a progressive mind has an idea of where things should go. So in a progressive state of mind, we attempt more. We have things like, Mies and Gary and Zaha and, these people that are pushing the envelope, Ideologically, they say, I think if we design this way, it could be better. We could live better. It could. And a lot of times they completely fail. And it would have been better if they stayed classical. But for the chances where they succeed, they give us a whole new, in a sense, a whole new language to speak, a whole new design ethic, if you will, that accommodates a more progressive way of living, potentially, more progressive with the materials and the sciences that we have. But it's interesting that we don't quite know, and we design by an ideology of where we think things should go, and then in turn it shapes us. So do you agree with that, that we're essentially on the progressive side of things looking to shape our designs from an ideological perspective?
Yes. Well, there's so many ways to respond to it, and I want to come back to how you describe you read and the sheet music. But I should say first, and I'll respond more directly to your question. But I also want to first say that I don't even have this kind of conversation with my clients. Right? They come in and talk about other things, very pragmatic things, cost, all kinds of things. And so,
Yep.
so these two quotes that I put at the beginning of the book do, in a way like you described, kind of set the tone. One being, as we already kind of talked about, please be aware that the homes that have been provided to us are an artificial construct. You do not have to buy into it. There's so much more out there to be explored. Let's do it. And the second quote being, for the sole reason for us to be aware that the built environment around has such a profound effect on us, that we owe it to ourselves to pay great attention to it. To expand for just a second on it, I mean, during the pandemic, we were all stuck at home, and we realized how bad our homes were. They were not meant for us to be in there. They just didn't work at all. In a book somewhere, well, I mean, there's numbers about divorces going up during the pandemic, and people reached out. They wanted suddenly additions and pools in their backyard and whatnot to alleviate that situation. That our homes just simply don't work, and they're not good companions in our life. Now we spend the majority of our time in our homes, and that built environment influences how we see ourselves in the world, how we experience ourselves during the day, and our homes have to do better. And so forget what we have been doing. We can do different, be progressive in your words about it, and find different things. And in order for them to have a better effect on us. I do think, to answer your question more directly, that I call it more, from my sense, it's a probing. All I get to do is to ask question, wonder, and probe, and hope I find design ideas, design solution, design paths that will have a positive benefit for my clients. I discover um, with them and the house, their home. And so it is for me a kind of probing, pushing on them, on their memories, on their stories, on their ideas, their truth,
Mm.
um, and pull things, long forgotten things out of them and see where it takes us and then be blown away. Uh,
Mm.
the best response I get, when I feel like I have succeeded, I feel happy. I clap my own shoulder or whatever. I celebrate, right? Is when clients tell me after they've moved in, when they share how they're still discovering their home, how it is how it kind of blends into their lives so perfectly, how
Mm.
they're no longer stressed at home, how they feel just invigorated, happy, on vacation, where this home, this physical surrounding is sort of adding to their life experience in very positively visceral ways. It's hard for them to describe. If I can bring them to tears in a good way, I've done well. The Now to go, maybe to get my path to the sheet music, which I love. The so I am very much the same way, that for me, what I learned or what I experience, and then how I creatively, actively work is, um, it's in between, it's in the crevices of all of that. And it is really schooled and informed by my desires, my yearning, my visceral understanding of the situation. And so, uh, and so just like you described, sort of your reading process, it's for me, it's very similar in a sense. I see these pieces. They in and of themselves don't mean much. I might not even be interested, but they're there. But cool, sexy stuff happens in between. That's where I see the
Mm.
life of my clients. I see the life that can be had in architecture, this informed by architecture. And so the like classical styles, as
The
far as their, yeah,
one thing right there, something from nature that applies directly to the point you're making, I believe, is how you outlined the sexy things in between the spaces, where you get,
hmm,
that's like the edge of a forest and a field.
yes,
My son's a big nature photographer, and that's where you find the most interactions is between the ecosystems.
yeah,
Like the predators will sit on the edge of a field in the forest, come out, and the
yes, yeah,
things that dwell in the forest, that's where there's the most activity back and forth, is on the edges of those spaces. And that's
yes,
interesting that we as humans still pull that into even our homes and recognize it
yeah.
according to what you're saying. And I find that to be true. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and so that's why, uh, uh, so the classical architecture for me is, so the like what you call, so the laws about it in your words, sort of.
Hmm.
Yes, they're for me. Why? Why do I have to? Those rules and regulations, if you will, of creating something have no bearing on me per se. Nonetheless, just like anything else, just like any other script or sheet music, there's a lot of richness in them as well. And
Hmm.
and that piece, those pieces I'm excited about. Now, our sort of classicist inspired public buildings, they don't have that.
Yeah.
They are just sort of following the sheet music without understanding or hearing the music in between the notes. And so for the most part, why did you bother? And but the richness is somewhere else. When you talk about the what you just sort of the picture you created there with the edge of the forest there. For me, that's architecture. The most important part is creating spaces. And so you put all of these things into the world, elements, material, to really create the spaces in between, this incorporeal thing that is hard to describe, is nothingness, is air, if you will, but it's defined by the textures, by the material, by the structures, by the proportions, by the design, by the pieces you put around it. But the importance is actually in those spaces and how you feel them. Like in my book, I think I reference to, a prison cell is demeaning. A cathedral is inspiring. Those are just some cheap ways to get anybody to see real quick how these spaces that is the field of magnets or whatever is powerful, but it's created by what we put around it.
Yeah, that's such a hard thing to photograph, because the first time
yes.
I've said this a lot on the podcast before, sorry to people who actually listen to this, but the first time I went to photograph a building, I started on the outside. It was a courthouse here in Biddeford, and I could relate to the exterior because we're constantly relating to the exterior of things. When I went to relate and capture the interior, I'd never done that before, and it was a very, very disorienting feeling. I was trying to capture a void where previously I'd always been capturing a exterior of a space, either a face or the exterior of a building, or I had never really tried to position myself to how do I best look at and understand this void. And that there, I actually gave up in that moment on architectural photography. No one was paying me, and I just got access because I knew a person. I was like, oh, I should try this. It might be something I'll be interested in. And the first attempt was so frustrating that I kind of packed it up and went home, and I was just, this is horrible. Luckily, I digested that and came back for another swing later in a different building. But being faced with that is a perplexing thing when you first run into it. But as you describe, the outlining of that thing, you're making real boundaries to make a space for this ephemeral relationship, life, weird thing going on. That's the actual importance, and you're doing the boundary around it. It's a difficult thing to really conceptualize and do well, honestly.
Yeah, and how to photograph that, and it's so interesting because, I mean, I would love to find out more about sort of your take on that, because bringing it back to your earliest comment about whatever the scrolling and this imagery, and we're so schooled now to like clickbait, this easy, quick thing, and our architecture does that too, where we now create these god-awful boxes because so there's just a box from the outside because it's an easy way to take an image of it. It's an object, the face of it, but it's like a shoe box. It's like thin outside wall is a box with a nice print on it, so you buy the shoes, and when you're inside the box, it's the interior of a box. It's awful. You don't want to be in there because it's not designed. It's designed for that quick image, but not what is so hard to capture on film or whatever digitally. But that's where architecture really excels and should excel. And so I would love to know more about sort of how you're finding yourself trying to, get in there and capture them.
It's a weird thing. I've had to, in my 40s, work on being more articulate and intelligent. Because up till about 44, I was still pretty much a teenager. So, but the thing I found in being able to explain how I interact now with photographing the interior of a space is that, for one, the emotion, I've done it enough, and the feeling comes like it just is like a key that doesn't turn, and then all of a sudden it turns. I can just, oh, that's it right there. Now, from there, I've had to recognize it every time and say, now, why is this the place where the key turns? And to me, it is informed by interesting foreground, middle subject, and background qualities. It's informed by the vignetting, the forming of the attention on where you're looking in the frame. But then most importantly, you have to consider the viewer. Where is the viewer going to be told the experience in this image of a void essentially is? Where do you want to be in that image? Where are you being told that you can pass through it? where are you being told that you want to come and sit in it, and what are you being told you want to be there and experience, or what do you want to look at? There's all those experiential things that to me are the things that inform where I place the camera, where I
Yeah.
where I move the subject to and arrange and style around that kind of most important thing first. So that's roughly how I come to that in shooting interior spaces, I think.
Is it easier then to have? I was just thinking, sorry, to kind of. So I was thinking that I I assume somebody told me once that an image is needs a focal point or something that your eyes get to kind of get led to. But then I'm here talking about the space where I want you to kind of get in and be there. So I don't want a focal point. And so I kind of, I've had these moments where I would see the space of this home that we've built and created, and it's there, and I'm like, oh, this is so, oh, gorgeous. And I was like, can you please take a picture of that? And the photographer said, well, look, you can't. It's nothingness, right? What do you want me to? I'm like, what if you do? And so my question, I was just thinking, listening to you, is it easier then maybe to have people do those photos with people, with models in the spaces to create a moment essentially in the space?
So,
and so,
yeah, so using a person in there is kind of like if you need to use a sign in your building.
yeah, right.
If the design is so bad that you got to tell people what to do with a sign, okay. Now, it's just what you have to do sometimes. I get it. But the difference in photographing a subject as compared to photographing a void is that in shooting the void, your thought is the experience of being in that space for the viewer.
Right.
Whereas if you're photographing a subject, it's about the subject, not the viewer, and what you want to tell the viewer about the subject. So that's where the difference lies in interior and exterior photography to me. Now you can take an exterior of a building and move it around enough to where, well, I want it to be about the experience of passing by this building or going through this transition space or being in this landscape, It all comes in on the attention of where you're putting it and the experience of the viewer. So if I want the experience of the viewer to be, I want to be in this space looking at that view, that's usually, like a back porch, a living room, a bathroom, a bedroom, whatever, exterior, interior. Or do I want to say a lot about what this architect designed as a subject? So if you're either shooting a subject or compelling your viewer to come into a created void. So that there's all that weirdness in there to kind of play
Can
around
I ask
with.
Can I ask you then, to me that sounds nearly impossible, the part about sort of the, photographing the void, the space. Do have you had a sense of success there when you?
Oh yeah.
Oh man, that's incredible.
Yes. House is paid off and I'm taking a lot of time off. So yeah. If I'm to gauge success by people who are willing to pay an inflated rate repeatedly in accordance to the creativity that I laid over their creation and they come back for more, yes, I've been successful at that. That's the metric that I have to use in looking at all of this continuing to go on. And the metric that the clients use is, are people responding to our photographs and asking for more of those services based on, first and foremost, they see the video or the photography, and then they see the design within the photography and how it's presented. And if those things work together, they get more business. The more business they get after using us, the more likely they are to continue to use us, and my harebrained ideas get proven as being successful. So that's how I look at it.
Awesome.
Let's see. Is there an argument for conservative design rather than progressive design? And I kind of took a jab at this earlier, but I'm wondering if you have a thought on that.
Depends of how you mean the question. I mean, if I take that on sort of how this country specifically, I don't know, seems to be defining it itself these days, then I don't know how to answer then. If I take that more
Let's go
general,
conscientious and open. A more
yeah,
conscientious take on design would be there are established ways
yes,
and reasons for designing the way we do. And if you do that, it will be successful because we can generalize ourselves to the nth degree and have a
yes,
backstop against bad design. That to me,
yes,
that's the argument for conservative design. If I'm looking for open design, I'm going Gary, Zaha, whoever,
yeah,
that's gonna try stuff
yeah,
and might get something great, might not.
yes, yeah. For me, all of that is in one and the same toolbox.
Yep.
And it depends really of what we're looking at, what we're asked to do here, and what we need to achieve. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and actually within one building, both can happen because there are moments. And so, I mean, there's very straightforward, tested, scientifically tested experiences about the idea of symmetry, and
Mm.
and so it works in a certain way. And so if you apply symmetry in a space, in a place, in a piece of architecture, it can have a certain effect,
Mm-hmm.
very conservative, if you will. And then,
Mm-hmm.
but that might be useful for XYZ, let's say for your bedroom. In fact, so there's like one house we're building right now that is in many ways very progressive, very out there trying, pushing, open, and different. But the bedroom itself, for instance, of the primary bedroom is then becomes kind of small, perfectly symmetrical, and everything, and to bring a certain security, safety, ease, straightforwardness, calmness to that one space where I want them to sleep. But when they step out there and have their grand get together in the obnoxiously explosive living room space, that better be something else. And so there,
Right.
it is much more. It's not necessarily Gary-esque or Zaha Hadid-like, but it is certainly much more playful and daring. And so I
Yeah,
think
that's
they're all,
interesting. The difference between playful and more work oriented. You play to be able to do the things that need to be done later. Every form of play is a training towards a more serious act, and it does seem like you have to play to be able to progress. And in architectural design, you got to get a little playful in some areas to see what works, and in some areas you have to be more work oriented. Like if you're working on mechanical systems, you probably want to be a little bit more conservative as far as knowing that the system we're putting in works. It might be a new development, but it works. We know that this is going to be reliable. So yeah, that's
yeah.
an interesting take on that.
You also put, if I could expand on that for just a second, and you put a finger on something very interesting too, which is that whatever we are creating, at the end it has to be, or whatever we are designing, in the end it has to be built. And so they
Mm,
are very straightforward, let's say, just forces in that process that we have to address and appreciate for what they are. A plumber plumbs in a certain way. We might be able to ask for one deviation over here, but that's about it. It still has to pass code.
mm,
It has to function. It can't leak, whatever, what have you.
right.
For every trade that is involved in the process, for every material, that's the same comes to mind. It is a very conservative kind of approach. To
Yep.
be energy efficient is actually a very conservative. You have to have a very conservative mindset. You're literally conserving energy restricting it, keeping whatever heated air inside the house and not push it out. It's a very conservative process. How do I add stick and bricks together to keep a temperature inside the house? How do I work with the trades that put the sticks and bricks together? Very conservative. And then you look at that and say, well, at places, well, how do I now use all of that conservative mindsets and explode that and create something just extraordinary that makes your heart skip a beat or two where it's
right.
needed.
Now, the next thing, let's see. First of all, do you have a definition of art? Now, I ask this because the degree that you go in on single-family homes being a luxury and superfluous, but also something worth taking very seriously because of the value added back to your life. There's both a condemnation in a sense, but also an acceptance of how valuable this thing is. That in my personal opinion, I think you go a little hard on single-family homes being like simply follies or foolish in a sense. I do think that there's plenty of people that would favor a single-family home even if they had to build it with just their own hands. In that sense, it's not a luxury. It's this is where I thrive, being on my own, being independent, self-sustaining, and I'll build my own home. And in that sense, it's not a luxury in that it's a must-have because you're going to die if you don't. You're going to die from exposure because you don't grow fur anymore, and
Yeah.
you're going to be in trouble. But if you're coming from a thought process of my purpose, belonging, and joy, and where I feel at home most is within a highly tight communal, more urban or city-oriented thing. But then we have this second home, 100%, like, yeah, sure, luxury, do it right, and everything else. But I wouldn't have such a blanket statement on a single-family home being simply a luxury. Now, and also neither, I don't think, and I'm open to being told I'm wrong on this. I don't think it's a luxurious, foolish, or narcissistic thing of being recognized through obtaining the luxury. In that sense, when I see someone write on a bathroom wall, scroll into the paint, when I see them write, "John was here," to me, that's a really interesting thing that a human just did. Because why? Why would they do that? They are not recognized anywhere else, yet they want to be recognized. And so they force you to say their name, think their name, while you're in there taking a dump or doing whatever you're doing. There's this sense of, I was here, and I'm not getting enough meaning. I mean, I doubt you've ever scratched your name into a bathroom stall. I haven't, because I haven't felt unseen enough to have to do it. Now, in the same sense, if I'm building a single-family home thinking that it's a vain thing that people will see it and then recognize me, then yes, I see that as a narcissistic, not that different than scratching "Trent was here" into the side of a urinal wall. What's your thought in response to that? Is that?
Yeah, I think maybe the proverbial key you mentioned earlier for me to that question, I feel like that maybe the way I think about the word luxury might be slightly different to what you said there. I feel like that I don't mean luxury in a way where it's narcissistic um, or it being superfluous. I find it to
Mm-hmm,
be a necessity and
mm-hmm,
one to take serious. And why I say that a single family home is a luxury is because if you take that hut or whatever you described that we have, the shelter we have to create to survive, it would be so much more efficient if we built a shelter for 4 or for 10. people than just one person. And
Hmm.
so it is highly inefficient to build one home for two people or a family of three.
Hmm.
It's ridiculous. 3,000 square feet for three people. It has to be heated and cooled, where we have to run utility lines to streets, roads to it. It's very inefficient. And you are finding yourself by yourself. And I'm making the argument in the book that if we were to live in vibrant mid-sized cities where, you have your whatever, your store downstairs, you have some offices on the second floor and apartments on the third. You can walk downstairs, you can walk to your grocery store, you can walk to work, take the subway to the theater. That would meet the necessity for shelter, would meet the need for us to, as social beings and cultural beings, to be invigorated and together, understand each other, live amongst each other, and also best way from an energy efficiency standpoint to kind of create shelter and places for ourselves. In that context, a single family, to create that as a single family unit is really a luxury. It's ridiculous. It's asking for something beyond just the shelter. It's asking for me to now create something that is pristine and special and a reflection of me and how I want to live, not in the sense of my name on the bathroom stall, but rather as the piece of art, as something gorgeous, as something different, as something specific that meets my life in a specific and certain way. And so what I'm saying is, so if I make that step and say, I know I could live in a better way, in a more sensible way, in a mid-sized city, which, we haven't created that many in the United States like that, obviously, but still, they are there, it's accessible, and we could create more of them. If I'm not doing that, but going to my single family home, then I better then do it right. To just throw out another cheap, empty beige box out there, it's unacceptable. And so
Mm.
it is a luxury. It's a luxury of being, and I think that's important. Our entire conversation today sort of hones down onto sort of our sense of it's very existential, if you will. It's about our understanding of ourselves, our being in the world. And so if I'm going as far as in creating a space, a place, and piece of architecture just for myself, me or my partner or one more kid, whatever, then I need to understand it is a luxury piece, and it's a good luxury. It's a luxury that is needed, that should be addressed, but it should be addressed on those terms then. And
Hmm.
so do it right, and bring the quality to it that it's asking for.
Now, for for those who cannot afford luxury but do not want to live in a closer, more communal situation, what would be the recommendation for how they should handle their single family housing at in a
Yeah.
more remote type of thing? Is there still a way that makes it responsible even at a more like, yeah, I
Yes.
have to work for money rather than inherit it, but I still want a single family house. I still want to be responsible, and I don't really have the money for luxury, but I still want to be out on my own, not in a tight situation. Is there a response to that in a sense?
Yes. Two responses. Quick one. You always, if you have money to pay for a housing unit, whether it's a single family home or a multifamily apartment type thing,
Hmm.
you ought to ask, if you can't afford one or the other, ask for luxury. I think everybody has the right and has the ability to ask for the luxury that's available to them. That should be the number one kind of ask of it. But to answer your question more directly, I wish, so my expertise lies in single family homes. When I came across what we are just talking about at the very first chapter of my book, I was like, great, here's my whole business is essentially kaput, forget it. But then I made the turn to realize if you do it, realize it's important and do it right. But to answer your question, so what I wish I would have ended up in is the coolest new thing is there's different words for it. Co-housing is one term, where essentially you come together, 6 entities, 12 entities. So whatever, this couple, this single person, this family, and they all pool their money, essentially their finances, to build a multi-unit building. And so they each own, as a condo, their unit in it, but they're part of the design, they're part of the construction, they form a community in the process, but they get to also change the design, the outcome, have their influences, and so it's essentially create the luxury that they should have, but as a group together. And so they own the design, they own the construction, they build it together, and then they live in there together. And so that's they pay for it together, and there's no outside developer involved into the process. And so that, I think, is the way to create living spaces in the United States these days. And there are some great examples here in the United States that are awesome to check out and look at. And I wish I somehow
We have a
ended up
couple
there.
here in Maine, actually.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think Go Logic had done. It used to be an architectural firm up here. Now they've divided into a design firm now called Opal, and there's still Go Logic, and they do really energy efficient homes and multi-development things. They also did like a whole eco village, very much like you're describing, that we photographed. That was very interesting. It definitely takes a more communal mindset, and you have to dial back the individualism highly present in the American mindset to be able to do it. It's a different set of expectations and assumptions that you have to reel in, but it can be done. But still an uphill battle with Americans to get them to readily adopt that approach, I would imagine.
Might be, yeah, I don't know, but I think I have high hopes for it, because I think it's a way to go, really. Yeah. But I hope I was able to kind of make the point that so that when I say luxury, it's about the quality of the spaces you find yourself, not its sticker price, not, it doesn't have to be a Bugatti for it to be a luxury. We can make a shoebox your personal luxury if you just spend the time, the attention, the love and care, and the creation of it, to become a luxury, to become something positive, something that is really adding to your life. And it's more than just a shelter.
Right.
A physical shelter.
The Toyota Corolla is still a luxury in that it gets you where you want to go way faster than walking. You don't have to get there on time. You could be late. It's reliable. That's luxurious. It's painted. That's luxurious. It's comfortable. It provides heat and air conditioning. That's luxurious. I guess it's a sliding scale as to what people consider acceptable luxury, required luxury, superfluous luxury. There's a gradient, a sliding gradient of what the American mindset for luxury is a different scale than the European mindset of luxury, I think.
Yeah, if I could pick that up for a second. So I spent a little too much time in my book to making the point that so in our single family home world, it's driven by two numbers, the square foot and the zip code. And in short, essentially, we have been trained to value our home by how many square feet it has and in what neighborhood it's in. So much so, or it's because the real estate market says so, because the banks finance based on that. And so we think that is the case. And so we go out there and ask for me to write my name on the bathroom stall in unit terms, give me more square feet and give it in a better zip code. While none of that adds any value to the quality of our life. absolutely zero. And so the one analogy I make in the book is the Maserati and the school bus. And I looked it up and made a calculation. It cost, try to find a price for a school bus wasn't easy. Uh, you can, for the exact same sticker price, you can buy a school bus and you can buy a Maserati. Let's call it $250,000. They're out there. The school bus and the Maserati, same price. The square foot price of the school bus is so much better. You're getting so much more square feet for the school bus than for the Maserati. What I'm saying is, what are you talking about? You're coming to me because you want to cruise down to the coast, arm in arm, take the, hairpin curves and the quality of the interior of the car, the way it revs up and, revs down, and the driving experience. All of that is what you're coming to me for. And then you're saying, well, give me a school bus that rattles and creaks and is, it's cold and hot in there and forget it. They cost the same exact price, but the quality is different in one. It's smaller, it's worse in the other, has more square feet. That's how we have been. So how have we been addressing or understanding or valuing our homes? Just the same as we value a school bus. And it's just mind-boggling wrong. I don't understand it. Why would you do that? Why would you do that to yourself? And I'm saying, when I'm talking about luxury, I'm saying don't spend more money. Do not be able, it's not about not being able to afford it. It's rather you have a budget, ask for the right stuff for it. That's all.
Exactly.
And ask for the stuff that makes your life better. And that's the luxury I'm asking for.
Yeah, this is very wise thought process, a very wise thought process in my opinion. But far too often the American mindset is more so, if you have a balloon, pump it up as far as you can pump it up to make it as big as possible. Now, the bad thing about that, if you're thinking the balloon, the more tight it gets, the more likely it is to fail. It'll become more fragile. It'll eventually blow up. Whereas if you just inflate that balloon a bit, it's going to have a thicker wall. It'll last longer. There's a bad analogy there, but it's like we've got design and a budget and a site, and we're just like, let's just pump it up as hard as we can. And then the whole thing just blows up and it doesn't go anywhere. And in, 15, 20 years, it gets bulldozed and they build something else. And if you can reel in your concern about the ego and seeing your next door neighbor, if you can reel that in and say size and square footage are valuable, but let's place them in the right value context, and let's look at, well, how about the connections in here? How about the insulation? How about the efficiency? How about how much this is going to cost you if you go bigger and bigger and bigger, let alone how much it's going to cost you to have a big, junky house? It's just all the way around. You have to kind of retool thinking in a sense to get to quality of life, quality of home coming first, rather than perception of how well you're doing. And perception of how well you're doing gets people to put brick on the front, vinyl siding on the sides, French gambrel or whatever, roof lines on top. And it's, you kind of think of, like, I was reading a little bit more this morning in the texture part of the book. And if you were to bring some aliens from Mars and they landed and they look around and you download all of history and they can conceive of it, and they're like, wow, look at these people. They still buy their homes like they're back in the 1700s France. They model it just like that, and you can kind of see it's a little odd. Why did we choose that to model in all of these cookie cutter homes in these weird cul-de-sac developments all across this country? We chose France. Like, okay. There's a weirdness in that we haven't been able to get our home building and designing into the same industrialization that our cars have. Our cars, the design has gone through the roof. The churn out of new technology and everything else and efficiency is taking off and doing well. But But with homes, it's still, every single home is still hand built by humans pretty much. What do you think the inflection point and what it's going to cause when it happens, when our cost of getting a home plummets and all of a sudden we have more of this situation of kind of like digital photography, in that I can take a picture very quickly and see what I did, and like, let's not do that, let's do this. Because that's what's happened to a car. We've been able to every year have a new model and a different thing, and it kind of provides a throwaway product in a sense if you're not careful. But at the same time, you get something that's incredibly difficult for people to build by hand. But because we can mechanize it, our technology and what we get is far better than what we really are actually paying for. Do you see that happening with the design and built environment of single family homes soon?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have that conversation with lots of people because, every industry is finding itself being disrupted and being actually looked at in ways that we have been talking here, where it's the question is, well, why are we doing this so ridiculously stupid? There's so much more efficient, better ways to do it and get a better product at the end of it. Why has that not happened in construction or specifically in our homes? I've been wondering about that, and I honestly do not have a good answer for it. There have been so many trial balloons out there from, pre-manufacturing, and so you can buy your housing unit, comes in on a flatbed. Don't think you're sort of double wide, but really modern, cool little things that, and you order it and it gets placed on your side from they call it 3D printing, but it's essentially pushing out blobs of concrete out of a hose and creating a house, the structure of a house with it, or insulated panel systems, things like that, where entire walls are essentially pre-manufactured and assembled. But it still doesn't work. And I honestly am starting to wonder whether it is precisely because of the reason of what I'm asking my clients to consider, which is that it's such a personal affair to create this surrounding for yourself, that to mass produce it or to create means of mass production, it's definitely possible, but it wouldn't scratch the itch of why we're doing it in the first place. What we're doing with it, though, at this point is a mass production system. When you talk about the cul-de-sac, all of these housing developments surrounding our cities, the suburbs, that is actually mass production. That is assembly line production. It is highly efficient, cheapened down to the last little piece, very repetitive. That is actually mass industry at its best. But it's being sold as individual sort of answers, responses to our needs, which they aren't. But that's, I think, why we're truly will never really mass produce our living surroundings, because we need more. We need something else. We need to have a place where we can just be ourselves and be addressed as the person we try to be. You started our conversation with the question of truth. I think that's where the problem lies, really. A phone, a mass-produced phone, what does that mean to me? It doesn't mean anything. Even the stuff that I look onto it, it has no, what does it mean? The car, it's a vehicle, it's a utility. Yes, we can talk about good design in it and all of that, just the same, but it's not the same as the home that we're talking about and yearning for. Don't get me wrong. I mean to say that, so I deeply believe that high design changes our lives. And so I want everything highly designed, from the car to the phone, coffee pot, whatever it is, it should be. But I think with the home itself, we come to a crossing point that I don't know if we ever are able to make that shift where we are suddenly finding ourselves in a cubicle for living. that is mass produced and stacked onto each other in whatever way that is. And that's exactly why we are so unhappy, depressed, in these awful boxes that are being thrown around and sold to us as homes, which they are. They're just not. They're awful.
Do you think there's a argument to say that we should engage with more of a more heightened degree of personalization in as much of our lives as possible, to where, hey, why don't we personally sculpt and change our cars to fit our lives a little bit more? Because you see people that cannot afford to do that with a home, they'll do that with a car.
Yeah.
So my parents, when I went to architecture school, the first thing, of course, I started chiding my parents about was, you know, like, look at all this vinyl siding. It's pretending to be wood, but you can push your finger through it, and it's not good. Then you start to notice, like, oh, these shutters, they're fake. They don't even go over the windows. Yet we keep putting these on houses. What are we doing? You know, and then my parents built a house, and they put brick on the front and, like, hardy plank on the sides, and, tried to color match them and everything else. And I was like, why are you doing this? And like, well, brick looks nice. You know, I was like, well, why didn't you do it around? It's too much to do it the whole way around. Well, just do the whole thing hardy plank. Well, we wanted the front to... You start to see these choices where you can point out, like, oh, you're doing something that is not the right thing to do, that looks silly. I can see you did something that you can't afford to do and had to half do it, right? And when they see it that way, they're like, oh, that's just kind of demeaning to think of us in that way. Yeah. And my response to that then is like, all right, why didn't you put the chrome things on your car to outline the wheel wells? Because this guy that drove by that has the chrome all over his car, we know he can't afford a house like you just built. And the people that are, you know, the billionaires look at your house just like you look at that guy's chrome car. They understand, if you're doing brick, do brick. Don't half it. But you can't afford that. So it's these things of looking at the different classes have their different ways of faking it to make them feel like they're more important. The brick on the front of my parents' house made them feel a little more important, even though they couldn't be honest, like, here's what we can afford, so we did that right. And then, so it still says there's this idea that if you're well off enough, you'll understand what's right and then be able to do it. How do you get out of that? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm always, every time I find myself in a clothing store, right? I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to pick out this pair of shoes here, or these pair of pants, and I know it's mass produced. This is a name brand store line here. Hundreds, thousands. The point is that hundreds and thousands of people buy the same pair of shoes, same pair of pants. And I'm thinking, so I'm going to be walking around and I'm going to stand in front of somebody that wears the same shoes and the same pants. Never happened. But once in the world have I stood next to somebody who wears the same, even one piece of clothing than I do. And so how is that possible? And I'm thinking that even if we were to take a test group, these 10 people, give them the same piece of items of clothing, and they would dress up and stand in front of you, they'll all will make each piece look different. The way they wear it, the way they put it on, whatever, it'll look different on each one of them. It's personalized. And so I think that, yes, I mean, I would love to see cars and things to be we should be able to somehow personalize everything much more than we are. Talking about the phones, you can sort of arrange your life in the phone in terms of its visuals to your liking, and every time you turn on the phone looks different from the next person because whatever, they've set it up differently. We want to, we need to, and everything has to. As for your parents and the brick, that's sort of exactly sort of where my book kind of drives in, and is where I'm saying, let's look at that. Let's ask ourselves these questions. Why the heck are you asking for in your sort of story there. Why are you asking for the brick at the front of the house and the hardy siding on the sides? What is that asking for? And so if they are true to themselves and to me, and they say, well, I do want to show off a little bit to the neighbors. All right, let's write that down. I don't
That
really
would be
like.
so hard for people to write down. Yes, I do want to show.
Well, no, I make them do that. I actually allow them to be honest with me and themselves and to each other. And if they say, well, I don't even like brick, it's ugly, I'll write it down. We go through all of that. And so that we then can say, okay, so let's see, how do we show off to your clients, but still do it in a way that makes sense for you, makes sense to your budget? How do we personalize your things with the things that are available to us, and in a way that you need to?
So in the same way that marriage counselors still get divorced,
Yes.
how difficult was it designing and building your own house?
Oh, it was the best. I loved it. It was awesome. I don't know how to put it. So first of all, to read, I got to, whether I misunderstand my family or not, I had a pretty clear picture of how we function and how we tick and how we work and what we need and what we don't need. And I also there was no translation between, I understood what our budget was and what needed to happen for it. And so this decision process was immediate. Like I could tell the question of the brick and the hardy panel was, I have walked through that discussion already, right? Internally. So me making that decision, do I need brick or not? Do I need hardy panel or not? Where do I want to show it? And what of it can I afford? The decision making between those 2 points was easy and quick, right? There was no, I didn't have to write a book and share it with me first in order to have the conversation. And so we were able to make decisions, drill down to the decisions, and understand where our own personal luxury lied, and where the funds had to be applied and where we had to hold them back. And I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I can't even, the costs, we couldn't afford anything. And we built it for next to nothing. But it is one of the most luxurious homes that I personally have been in, simply because I got to choose. I didn't even walk in there and talk about the school bus. I talked about the Maserati. I shared with myself what the budget is. And my family, luckily, was, for some reason, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and docile enough. Wow. They maybe had enough trust to say, it seems to work. We still have this design. We had a miserable design disaster number 126, I'm sure, in our home. And my family tells me, well, that was stupid to design it that way. I hit my head every time I wash the dishes. I hit my head at the cabinet above. It's like right there in the corner. I have a permanent hole on the left side, my left temple.
Oh, no. You just put a big tennis ball on that.
Yes, exactly, right? So I did plenty of things wrong, but they don't matter in light of the quality we created.
What so your experience with doing that sounds very similar, except for it was difficult. Actually, my wife and I were on pretty much the same page. We had some battles over if we were going to have a basement or not. And she wanted to put sheep's wool and cork in the walls, which was
love it.
It's great, but you could have just gilded the whole house in gold for the cost. Yes, so we had to do blown-in cellulose and double-studded, foot-thick walls with blown-in cellulose, and there was compromises that had to be made for affordability while retaining high efficiency. And the luxury that we put into our home was the investment in windows. We have a a nice location where we're at, and that was the part that was like, let's not cut that part of the budget at all. It's really worth it. And we built like only the first half of the home when we first finished, and then had to finish the second half of the home. We all lived in the same bedroom downstairs, all four of us. That was rough, but we got through it. What
Yes.
is the luxury that you knew and kept in your home that wasn't necessity to continue living, but definitely where you spent more money than you could have because of your appreciation for what you were
Yeah.
spending the money on?
So I share some of those in the book. Let me tell you two stories. So one, to pick up your point there about the brick in the front of the house. Actually, yeah, so what we did, to be somewhat brief about it, so texture, so the brick has an incredible texture and brings just some kind of earthen sense to the building. And so from, diagrammatically speaking, we essentially built one long brick wall. It's like a foot and a half thick, 8 foot tall, 40 feet long, and sort of leaned the house onto it, the spaces against it. And so that brick wall cuts through the entire house. It sticks out in the front and cuts through the house and enriches every single space of the home. And it has that omnipresence, it has that stoutness, that richness, the sunlight, light and shadow washes over it during the day as the day goes around the house. It greets you when you walk in. It guides you into the home and up some stairs. It defines a sequence of privacy from highly open public spaces up front to very more private spaces as you go around the wall, if you will. And so that was one. I go at length about it in the book, and has been incredible having that enrich our home ever since. The other one that has been just incredible is that, so one of these conservative wisdoms, to pick up an earlier piece of our conversation, is that a simple room feels much happier open when it has windows on more than one side. And so we have three daughters, and they each got their own room, and we arranged the rooms like in like flower petals around sort of a central point. And so that means they were sticking out from each other. In each room, and because of it, had now windows, floor to ceiling windows on three sides of each room. And so each room was light
Nice.
filled, was open to the outside and the nature outside. But by the way they were sort of pinwheeling around each other on the tips, they could sort of see into each other, into the room of each other's rooms. And you couldn't really see them in the room because you just saw the window on the tip of the next room. And so they always had their sisters. Each sister had their other two sisters around them. They knew they were there. They saw the shadows there. They saw the lights turn on or not turn off. And so as we now lived in the home, and I describe it in the book of how, so we have teenage daughters, we live our life, we, can get into it. And downstairs on the big stage, and we'll have had to learn how to have arguments and how to love and hate each other. And they get to storm away into the room, slam the door, but it really never took that long for them to then, know, see the lights turn on. They're still there. They still got my back. And so for them to grow up with that sense of like that fierce independence, but the knowledge that they always had each other's back, I think that actually the home did its part in enriching our lives in that way, even though obviously I want to say that, that also was developed through other things, but definitely the house played its part or helped in the process of all of that, and stepped in the right way. And so there was two examples where all of that took attention. It took some funds, but it was mostly in just the attention and time taken to think about how we should live.
Well, that's actually a really beautiful example of taking an ideology of what you want your family to be and turning that into a design aesthetic that you can argue a point from to say that the design of this home reinforces the ideology of our family, and to have that working together, especially when you'd have 3 daughters, to work that through is, I can't imagine. I have 2 boys, and I just have to keep them from destroying the house. and I know daughters can be difficult in very different ways. And so good stuff there. Well, Toby Witte, am I saying that right?
Yeah, Toby Witte, yeah.
Witte. I really appreciate this book. I really appreciate you coming on today and taking the time to answer my very wide-ranging kind of existential questions about it. But I would recommend the book to anyone looking. I went through architecture school, so I knew what I was getting into when I came designing my own house. This book goes through all the things, the kind of walls that you have to crash through to get to the point of understanding what you're actually doing. I almost would equate it to the movie scenes when they take them to prison and strip them down and hose them off and throw the powder on them. They're getting rid of all this stuff before you come in to where you're supposed to be or whatever. This takes all the bad ideas of society and sprays them off, lets you look at them for what they are, and then kind of start to think about, all right, what is the value of luxury that you're going to be putting into your home? What are the actual things that are going to have a return on your money other than people driving by and looking how tall the top of your roof is and how wide your house is and thinking something great about you? Rather, have a smaller house that's more luxurious, that greets you when you come home, that presents to you the reason you're home and comforts you while you're there, and is essentially a work of art that speaks to you in your life and how you live through it. That's why I think this book is so valuable for anyone coming to design their own house or to come to work with an architect. I would highly recommend this book as a first take of what to expect and how to think when coming to it. Now, granted, I've only read halfway through, but I can still say that it's on par with everything that I spent a bunch of money learning in architecture school. So thank you, Toby.
Oh, Trent, I can't thank you enough. That is so beautifully put. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to transcribe what you just said. That is gorgeous. Thank you so much. And
you can put that in your next book, or that's a recommendation for your last or something. I don't know.
Thank you so
much. Where can people learn more about you, your book, and your design firm?
Yeah, thank you. The book certainly is being sold wherever books are sold. And there's a website for it, supersizingbliss.com. And then my design firm, it's called Witte House, and it has a German spelling. And so.
Uh-oh. Just lost your audio.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there we are.
Let's see. Can you hear me again?
I can hear you now.
Okay, so sorry about that.
That's all right.
The website my firm is Witte House, WITTEHAUS.
Toby Witte, thank you so much. The book is Sizing Bliss, and highly recommend you check it out. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Trent. Appreciate it.